If you're considering using braided mainline, then this is the video for you. So first let's address why I'm using braided mainline in the first place. So this is my setup. We've got a 9-foot 3-pound test curve Nash scope with a Shimano 14,000 Ultegra XTC big pit reel. Now I'm using this setup for river carping, but it's the sort of setup that you might want to use if you're fishing over rocky or snaggy ground and you need a very robust setup. And I'm using a 40-pound mainline because I need a huge amount of knot strength in this situation. One of the challenges with fishing over rocky ground is what happens when a lead gets stuck or a hook gets stuck, actually hooked onto a rock. If you're just using mono mainline, 0.40 or even 0.5 mono, that's not going to have the abrasion resistance that you need for this scenario. You're going to have to add a leader at the business end. And if you've just got mono going to the top of that heavy duty mono leader, if the rig gets stuck or the lead gets stuck, if you try and pull for a break, that leader knot is going to fail. And the result is that you're going to leave a leader and the rig in the lake that you're fishing. And no one wants to do that. As an angler, that's the last thing you want to do. So the best solution that I've found to this problem is to use a super strong braided mainline and then add a mono snag leader, and that will give you the knot strength that you need, it'll give you the cut resistance that you need, and it will give you the elasticity that you need in order to safely play and land everything that you hook. So if this setup is all about strength, then the knot that we choose to connect the braided mainline to the mono snag leader is absolutely critical. My honest advice is that the best knot is the one that's strong enough for the sort of fishing that you are doing. So how do we go about working out how strong that leader knot needs to be in the first place? So to work out what leader knot strength I need, I'm going to use some heavy duty snag leader. This is 40 pound 0.60. Next, you're going to need to grab a packet of whatever hooks that you're using for this kind of fishing. And then I'm simply going to take the hook and I'm going to tie a half blood knot. I wouldn't ever normally fish with this like this. This is just for a hook point strength test. That's what I'm doing. Wet it, pull it down. And this is not about the strength of either of these knots. It's about what force is necessary to bend the hook point open. So I've been fishing this river since 2012, and the problem was that the hook point would often just get caught on a rock like that. And if the setup isn't strong enough to bend that hook point off, break it or bend that hook open, then you had mainline failure at the top of the leader, and that's not what we want to see. Now these hooks are monstrously strong. I've got guests at the lake banking cats of 120, 130 pound on just a size 6 carp hook, so phenomenally strong. So it's going to take some poundage to bend this tip open. So that I know what force is being applied here, I'm going to zero my Rubens and we're going to do a straight pull. So I'm going to steadily increase the load, and we're at 10 pounds, 14 pounds, 16 pounds, 20 pounds. There we go. That is what a size 6 twister looks like after you've put 20 pounds of load on the point. But that's what I need to do in order to break it out of a rock. So I'm looking for a knot strength of at least 20 pounds. So how does this scenario even happen? Well, if you can imagine you're fishing over, I've just got a couple of rocks here, but if what you're fishing over looks like this, you cast a rig out into a zone like this, and you've got flowing water, the lead lands, the rig lands, and the current will literally pull or push the rig into a scenario where the hook hooks on a rock like this. Now, if you get a pickup from a carp, you're never going to have a problem. You're going to land that fish no problem. But if a carp doesn't pick it up, when you go to wind in that rig, it's going to be trapped on a rock. Now, you might say, well, that's hardly going to happen, but it has happened to me loads of times. This is why I need this setup. And this can be swim specific, river specific. It can be, you know, a certain part of a swim can be very productive in terms of getting pickups because the carp have scoured it and scoured it. And this is why these rocks stick up. When the carp have been sucking and blowing over the ground, it becomes very clean, but the cleaner it becomes, if it's a rocky substrate underneath, you're left with these little boulders sticking up, which are absolutely wonderful for hooking on a hook point and causing you no end of ag. Right, let's load this one up. So we're at 10, 12. If I stop at about 15, and let's see if that's taken a permanent set. Yeah, that's taken a permanent set. Now, I've recently seen some other brands of hooks that have opened out when an angler's been playing fish. You can't put 15 pound of load on a rod and reel. You just can't do it unless you're in a kind of straight pull scenario. So 15 pound of force is what's required in order to take a permanent set of a shod twister. So that is a monstrously strong size 6 hook for my money. So in that simple test, it's taken between 17 and 20 pound to bend open those hooks and to safely recover the rig. Now you might say, well, you know, I'm fishing with 20-25 pound mainline, you know, why can't that do it? Well, the real answer is that just because it says 20-25 pound on the spool does not mean that you're achieving anywhere near that in terms of real world knot strength. And I know from my real world experience that 20-25 pound monofilament mainline is not strong enough in order to bend open a hook in that scenario. So this is why I need to use a 40 pound braided mainline and then a 40 pound monofilament leader, because there's not going to be too much stretch in a monofilament leader if I'm only using 4 or 5 meters of it. Then I just need to connect the monofilament leader to the braided mainline with a knot that can achieve a real world knot strength of in excess of 20 pounds. And if I can do all of that, I can safely break rigs free from rocky situations, and I never leave any gear in the river. So this is the 40 pound high line, and I want to have a look at what sort of cut resistance it's got. Now this might seem absolutely savage, but I'm going to take a new Stanley knife and I'm just going to run it across that braid while it's under load. I just kissed it on there and it's gone. That might seem, well, that's absolute rubbish, but braid is notorious for having a low amount of cut resistance. This is why we add a mono snag leader to it. Right, let's have a look at the cut resistance of some heavy duty mono. This is the 40 pound snag leader, and again we're just going to put that under a little bit of load, same blade, and I'll kiss it on there and absolutely nothing's happening. I'm putting that under force. If I run it along, I can run it back and forth, and of course it went, but it had a lot more cut resistance than the braid. So this is why I add a mono snag leader when I'm fishing over zebra mussels, because it's the cut resistance that I need. Right, let's have a look at the abrasion resistance of this material. This is what I do all my testing on, and it's on a clamp on the bench, and all I do is rub it back and forth over the rock. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 71, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. That's about 75 strokes, and that's failed at that. That is a monstrous amount of abrasion resistance to make that material fail. Let's do exactly the same again with the 0.60 mono. We're just seeing how these two materials compare in terms of abrasion resistance. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so that is 126 back and forths to absolutely shred that leader. So mono snag leader has got better cut resistance and better abrasion resistance, and that is why I'm using this material. So this material is very strong, it is very abrasion resistant, but it's not in the same league as 0.60 mono. I can't just use 0.60 mono all the way through, because 0.60 mono is just, well, it's damn near impossible to cast off conventional gear. You know, you need massive multipliers. So we need the low diameter and low stretch of this material in combination with the massive amount of cut resistance and abrasion resistance of this material. So the spools are all loaded up with braid. Now it's time to put some snag leader on there. So I need to work out how much leader I'm going to put on these reels, and to do that I need the rod fully built, and then I need to work out what knot am I going to use. There's loads of different knots to choose from. Different knots suit different combinations of materials, so I might spend a couple of days tying a load of knots and seeing which performs best. What can I tie the easiest, the most consistently, and what gives me the performance that I need from that knot. So the knot I'm going to tie, it's called the GT knot. We take some of the leader material and we just do 2 overhand knots. So that's 1 overhand knot and then a second overhand knot. And I just draw those up until the material goes in a little figure of 8 like that. This is the tag end side. This is our braided mainline. And what we need to do, we need to follow the path of this piece of mono here. So we go up through there and then down through there, following the exact path that this piece of mono takes through that loop. Right, now I'm going to turn the knot around to do this, and we're going to form the number 6 shape, as it's called, or you just go kind of back on yourself towards the knot, hold that loop open, and then we pass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. So we've whipped 10 times around the mono, and if we just pull on that tag in there, you can see it's starting to close up. We want the wraps to stay evenly spaced. We don't want to kind of double stack them. Then we can see that these knots have moved far away from one another. So then I pull the braid on the one side and the leader on the other, and these 2 knots approach one another. Now what I want to do is I want to close down this double overhand leader knot here, and to do that I pull on the tag end of the leader and the main leader line itself, and I'll do this when it's wet. And I start to draw the knots together again. And the braid starts to spin and rotate. It starts to look like that. I haven't fully tightened that down yet. The most important thing when you're doing a leader knot is you have to tighten it down really well, otherwise it will slip and fail. And to do that properly, you're going to need a few tools. I've got a casting glove. I'm then going to use my trusty lighter, and I'm going to use a mallet. That works quite well because I can grip it really hard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns. And I whip the leader material around that. Give it a good wet up. We'll just give it a really good pull. Be slow, steady application of a force. So that's the fully tightened knot, and you can see how much it's kind of squashed and compressed there. Very, very carefully. There we go. If you're not busting a few knots when you're doing knot pulling and tightening and testing like this, you are not pulling hard enough. I pull really hard because I need these to be amazingly strong knots. The next decision you've got to make is, well, how long a leader do you need in the first place? If you need to cast a long way, then you can't add too much length of leader. The more leader you add, the more distance it's going to cost you. You then need to understand what sort of ground that you're fishing over. If you need to prioritise for casting distance, then you need to consider leader lengths of 4.5, maybe 5 metres. If casting distance isn't so much of an issue, maybe you're fishing short or medium range, but the terrain is very rough, then you might want to add 10 metres or even 15 metres of leader if it gets really nasty. If you imagine a situation where you're fishing at close to medium range and it's a very, very long, steep, rocky margin, maybe 5 or even 6 metres deep. If you hook a carp in that kind of situation and it goes along the margin, then you're going to need a lot of cut resistance and a lot of abrasion resistance as the fish goes to your left or to your right. because the fish are always going to try and kite into the margin in my experience. So that's the leader knot that we've tied. If I position the leader knot just outside the tip ring, that's fine as is like that, that's going to pass through there no problem. But one of the challenges of fishing flowing water or fishing the big reservoirs and stuff, especially in the spring, is that when the algae blooms start, especially filamentous algae, these leader knots can get completely gunked up, and sometimes I've found if I leave the rod in the water for too long, that knot can become so gunked up that it won't even pass through the tip ring. Now you imagine you're fishing away, you get a take, you're playing a fish, and that leader knot won't even pass through the tip ring. Now if your leader length is too long for the length of landing net pole that you have, the length of rod you've got and the length of arms you've got a real problem, because I've had to hand line them before now, and I tell you what, that is not a good plan. You have to make your hands and arms become a rod, and it's not recommended. What I want to do is I want to make sure that even in the worst case scenario, if this leader knot becomes completely gunked up with rubbish, with green slime, that I can still safely land the fish. So if I simulate what would happen if I got too long a length of leader and I can't get that leader knot through the tip ring, I've run out of arm. My landing net's only so long. I can go a little further back on the rod. I can get to about there, but if still that's not enough, I'm in big trouble. And what I'd have to do is I have to do that and then basically hand line them like that. So I've settled on a leader length of 4.5 meters. That means that I can safely land everything I hook without the leader not having to pass through the tip ring. It also means that there are 3 or 4 turns of leader around the spool that will absorb the shock of the cast. So this is the completed setup ready for fishing. 40-pound braid, 0.35, tied directly to a 0.60 mono snag leader. At the other end of the mono snag leader, we've got a metre of rig tubing, and then that's going down to a heli sleeve. I've got the top bead in position on the heli sleeve, and that's just going to fly up there on the take. So it's just going to do that, bunk. So this casts like a semi-fixed rig, but it's actually a running rig in terms of how it fishes. The run ring is a Fox run ring, and that breaks at about 10 pound of force. So if this dumpy gripper ever gets stuck between some rocks, we've got a very strong setup here, and I can break that ring off. Yes, I'm going to lose the lead, but that's the only thing I'm ever leaving in the water. I've left the top swivel in place on this lead. It makes it a little bit long. If you don't like that, then just cut that off and you can quick link directly onto the top of the swivel, so it would be more like that. There's a 3mm silicone sleeve in place over the quick change just to keep it nice and neat. Underneath the heli sleeve, we've got a regular size 8 swivel. It's not a quick change or anything, normal swivel, 3-turn half blood knot, 3-turn half blood knot. And I'm just using a short little anti-tangle sleeve. I thread onto the hook link. I'm tying the hook link directly onto that swivel. There's no need to quick change. These are one use only rigs. So when that's done its job, I should just cut that off, tie a new one on. If I was using a thinner hook link material, I'd use a longer anti-tangle sleeve. The rig itself is a mono bait loop rig. I'm using a size 5 chod twister and then a large hook bead on there to kick that bait loop out and stop the mono rotating. To connect the baits, I've just used some bait floss, and I've done a cut and blob at the other end. Hook baits can be anything you want, of course. Could be a snowman, could be a single bait. In this case, I'm using 2 salt cured 18mm live system boilies. This is how this rig is going to cast. Lead's going to go first, and then the rig's going to trail behind. And this little top bead is keeping the rig from separating. It's to stop bait separation, because if we get bait separation during the cast, then we can have tangles. So this casts like a traditional semi-fixed rig, but in a fishing situation, carp's going to come along, feel the weight of the lead, try and shake it out, dunk, and it's off. And then it's free running up the tubing, completely safe, and the carp will not know how to deal with that. So this is not a normal bead. This is the bead that comes with the Nash heli sleeves, and you can see it's got a big bore, and the bore on the other side is tapered. So that's how they go. So they pass up and down rig tubing very easily. The whole idea of this setup is that no matter what happens, I'm never leaving gear in the river. The only thing I might lose is a lead, but I still have to think in terms of things going wrong beyond my control. And in this case, that's the leader knot there. The little top bead passes over, ring flies over the top, so it's going to be a safe rig. We're also fishing with barbless as well, so nothing bad can happen with this rig. So in this example I'm using 0.60 mono snag leader as a leader, and I'm using exactly the same material as a hook link. This is because of the nature of the rocks and the zebra mosses I'm fishing over. If you only need to use 0.50 for your hook link and your leader, all the same principles apply. It's exactly the same. The other advantage of this system, of course, is that I can swap lead sizes. Now, you could just fish that braided mainline straight down to the lead. It is an option. The problem is, if you do that, braided mainline has no stretch in it. Without any stretch, that means that when you do hook a fish, all of the power of the fish is going to have to be absorbed by the clutch and the rod. And sometimes that is just not enough, especially if the carp lunges really fast. It can push your setup beyond what the hook hold can take. And this is where you can get hook pulls. So what I do is I add a mono snag leader at the end of the braided mainline. This builds some elasticity back into the system. It acts like a big spring and prevents those hook holds from pulling out. The other advantage to adding a mono leader to braided mainline is that although braid can have decent abrasion resistance, it doesn't have as good a cut resistance as mono. So if you're fishing over sharp rocks, or worst case scenario like I am, sharp rocks covered in zebra mussels, then you need a lot of cut resistance built into the system. Otherwise you are just going to get sliced and diced every time you hook a carp. So if you're looking to create a really strong setup for fishing over rocky ground, then use thick, strong braided mainline, add a heavy duty mono snag leader at the end of it, and that will give you the knot strength that you need, it'll give you the cut resistance that you need, and it will give you the elasticity that you need in order to safely play and land everything that you hook. So I've stripped off the old line from my Shimano spools, and they both have 6,000 size spacers on them. Now I've done the maths, and if I'm using 0.35 mainline, I can only fit 240 meters of line into those spools, and that's okay if that's the amount I needed. But what I want to do is I want to split 1200 meters across 3 spools, so I need approximately 400 meters per spool. In order to do that, I need to take off the 6,000 spacers and put the 10,000 spacers on, because that's going to increase the line capacity of these spools. Obviously, if you haven't got line reducers on your spools, then you're going to have to add some backing line. The easiest way to do that is to use the reverse fill method. That's whereby you load on the amount of braid that you want, and then you put backing line on after up to the level that you require. You then have to reverse load that off. So to join this braid onto this spool, I'm going to use an arbor knot. To tie the arbor knot, we just make one loop, and then we make another loop, and then we go once, twice, and we draw that semi-tight. Then we do an overhand knot in the end of the braid. So we've got 2 overhand knots here, 1 overhand knot here, and then we've got a loop that gets bigger and smaller depending on how we pull it. So we've already threaded the line through the butt ring here. Pop the bail arm open, and then we take this arbor loop that we've made and we pass that over the spool, and then we start to draw it down. Take a glove. I've just got my casting glove here and I've wrapped it around a few times, and you basically pull it until it cinches down. So this is the method I normally use with mono, but the problem I have is that I simply cannot get that arbor knot to grip that spool. It just keeps on sliding around, and if that slides, then I can't spool this up with tension, so it's no good. So I'm going to have to fix that. I'll be honest with you, I've never tried spooling up a spool with braid without any backing line before, and the problem is that the arbor knot can't grip the spool because there's no elasticity in it. It doesn't work like an arbor knot does with mono. I've had a go at a couple of different solutions that I found on YouTube. None of them are any good at all. So I found my own solution, and we're going to get some electrical tape, wrap it around a few times, and yeah, holds it in place, no problem. Let's have a look at that now. I'm going to lay the braid out with that bit going away and up in a kind of tick shape like that, and then I'm going to start to wrap the braid around manually, and I'm just trapping the tag end of that braid. So I've gone 3-4 times round there, and if I get some electrical tape, when I tape over, I get the tape round and go all the way. Now I don't want to go as far as I have there. I want to stop at that point there, cut that off, pull that out from there, and we just smush that tape firmly over the braid. And then you see when I put tension on that, it's going nowhere. I can pull really hard, so we're going to be able to spool that reel with tension, and we haven't got an ugly knot there. It's all going to work out just fine. So that's a great way of doing that. The one thing you've got to pay attention to when you do that method is you've got to understand how a fixed spool reel works. So the bail arm, when I wind forward, the bail arm is rotating that way, so it's going to take the line and it's going to wind that way. If I'd have done that exiting the other way, it would have been trying to peel off the tape, and that would have been a bit of a mess really. And then when I start to turn the spool with tension, we start to get our wraps going round like that. Nice, that's going to work. I've put the water in. I haven't put too much in because I just want to have it as a bit of control really. I've got a couple of pots of leads here that's just in old pop-up pops, and then that's going to hold the spool upright but leave it free to spin. So I want to pull it off there. It's going to drive in that corner. So the next piece of information I need to know is the number of centimetres per turn of the crank handle. 103 centimetres or 41 inches is the number on these reels. Okay, right, let's start turning here. So that's 1, 2, right. Spool's locked into position, so that's good. I'm just going to get an old cloth here, dunk it in the water, because what I need to do, I need to load this braid under constant tension. So what I want to do here, as I've just folded the cloth over my rod, I don't want to hold the braid against the rod because I'm going to cut grooves in my rod. So a few folds over like that, and that should be able to give me enough tension. 21, 22, 23, 80, 380. Right, let's have a look at that. There we go, so we've got a nice bit of daylight. So that way it shouldn't frap up at all. I could probably squeeze a bit more on if I wanted to. So that's 380 handle turns, 392 metres, and for me that's about spot on for braid. If that was mono, I could fit plenty more on, sure, but you do not want to overfill braid, otherwise you're going to have terrible problems with wind knots.